Hello, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the last podcast. I thought it was pretty important to get that out there. On a bit of a roll at the moment, which will end at some point. So please forgive me if this is coming a little hard and fast at you. There's a lot to take in, and I do urge you to take your time with the podcasts and to really listen and integrate them into your comprehension and understanding. And again, if you've got any questions, please let me know. I'm doing this one because I've just been on another network very curiously looking at UFO abduction stories and evidence that's been collected for decades about this phenomenon. Human beings being abducted most often in the middle of the night, seeing bright lights, and humanoid beings taking them to a facility of some kind or lying them on a table, a flat surface, and performing experiments and even breeding with these humanoid beings. And after much consideration, I have my own idea about what exactly is going on, and it does tie in with the work that I've done on the simulation. And I think we need to keep this in mind when we're looking at UFOs and abductions, that we are in a simulation, that it is just as likely that anybody experiencing an abduction that has connection to cable or satellite, TV, radio, may in fact be being infiltrated at imperceptible levels through the subconscious to manifest an experience preordained by the information that is being broadcast in the airwaves and how our minds pick this up. Most often in the sleep state, when the brain waves are altered to be receptive, more consciously receptive to this information. Before I go on, I want to, if you recall, there was a haunting in Britain. I hope I remember the name of it before I get through this podcast. The Enfield, there it is, the Enfield haunting. And what I discovered about the Enfield haunting, and it was terrible, that the poor family called the police on the first night. The police agreed there was a serious problem, but there was nothing that they could really do about it, and said, no, basically you need a priest. And for the next while, they had a house that was basically doing things on its own. They were coming home and finding furniture turned upside down, furniture on top of itself. The girls were levitated, getting thrown out of their beds. Curtains were flying up in a wind that wasn't present because there were no windows open. And they would come home to find arrangements of things on the kitchen floor. I think there was some combustion that happened, money that burst into flames, and all sorts of things in kitchen drawers. Anyway, the whole house was getting turned upside down, and it was seriously investigated by reputable individuals at the time. And at some point later on, they decided that it was a hoax, because at some point during that haunting, one of the girls decided to prank because they were getting attention from the press, and they decided to prank. And despite the earlier credibility of what was actually happening in the house, it was eventually written off as an entire hoax, just because the girls got it into their head to prank people well after the original haunting took place. I found information online, data online, that was streaming that was airing on television that night, the night that the haunting started. And believe it or not, it was an episode of The Price is Right, which is watched. It was a very, very popular program. So when you have a lot of people tuning into a program, there's a lot of conscious attention being given to the information that's coming through the airwaves, and there is therefore magnified. And what I noticed was that the content in the program, and specifically the advertisements, was mirroring what had happened in the house that night. To explain this a little more intricately, for example, there was an ad for mattresses. And in the ad, they had sort of, photoshopped them into the sky and showed them going upwards into the sky. There were other furniture ads for tables and chairs where they were spinning around in the advertisement to make it look flashy and everything. And find it yourself. Find the date that the Enfield haunting started. Find the new Price is Right episode that is on YouTube the night that haunting started, and you will see very uncanny similarities between the advertisements during the airing of The Price is Right on the night the Enfield haunting started and what actually happened in the house. This is an era of television. And as I said, when you have a very popular program and it becomes the leading program for that time slot, a whole other bunch of things need to line up data-wise. Addresses, you're probably wondering why that house. Well, the address has to line up with the data, the family, the birth dates of the family, the postcode, the country, etc., etc. And you get an alignment, you get a fusion of data merging with the physical location that the data aligns with. And then basically what happens is, because we're in a simulated reality, a house appears to be haunted and things are flying everywhere when really it's just being puppeted and mirrored and mimicked, is mirroring and mimicking what is happening in the airwaves. That being said, this also happens with human beings. Sometimes we have incredible dreams that we can't really fathom where they came from or what it meant. You will find that at some point during the evening there was something airing on television that will give you the answer to that. Also radio, and now with mobile internet, it's anyone's guess. There's so much happening that, as I said in the previous podcast, there's a mental health epidemic. A lot of younger people are experiencing paranormal events. Lots of people have uploaded photos online to weird things in their photographs and all sorts of stuff, and it's all data related. It's all in the airwaves, and our minds pick this up, and we end up seeing a version of what is being sent through the airwaves. Getting back to UFO abductions, what a controversy and an incredible cover-up that has occurred for decades now, especially when it comes to sightings and legitimate abductions, that one has to wonder why the answer has not become perfectly clear by this time. We all know that the government, in releasing, declassifying documents, there are a lot of redactions. There's a lot of stuff blocked out. There's a lot of stuff that they prefer that we not read. It doesn't really paint them in a good light in terms of their involvement in these things or what they might be afraid for us to know. However, as I started out saying, I was looking at some videos and some conversation on another network about UFO abductions that happened in the 70s and the 80s. You'll be familiar with Whitley Strieber. There's a lot of people that this has happened with. They claim to be taken. And there's bright lights and there's humanoid type beings, and they are experimented on, and some of them are used for a breeding, what they believe to be a breeding program, And some of them are even at a later date allowed to see their offspring. What occurred to me, I was trying to put sort of 2 and 2 and 4 and 6 together on this and sort of look at it. Okay, let's forget about the fact that we're in a simulation for a second and just look at perhaps what the government involvement in this phenomenon really is. And it occurred to me that up front, a lot of these abduction victims sort of claimed that it was sort of dreamlike, but also very real at the same time. Some have expressed that these beings hold up a little stick with a light on it and it buzzes and they become unconscious or something. Others don't quite know how they find themselves in a facility on a table. There's a lot of gaps in the way they tell their experiences, not because they're inauthentic, but because the memory of the experiences is not altogether cohesive, while others are. What I noticed is that if you look at what happens when you're sleeping, the brain waves are altered. And some of you may have had the experience of being asleep, but of sort of being half awake. And there's something happening in your immediate environment which is quite loud. And for some strange reason, you can also sort of see or get an impression of what's happening in your environment, but you're still half asleep and you're dreaming. And your experience in your dream of what's happening actually in your environment is somewhat magnified and distorted and louder than it probably is. And you feel it with more of your inner body than you would if you were simply awake and engaging in the discussion that was happening or the removalists that were coming in and out or whatever it is. And it occurred to me that if a government car turned up with flashing lights at a residence and simply appeared to take a person into a facility to conduct some experiments and pop them in a breeding program, and this was done while an individual is either suddenly sedated, tasered, or stunned in some way, that the individual's recollection of the event would be as if they are on morphine. The visual perception of what has happened would be as if the scientists with the microscope goggles on are actually, pale-skinned aliens with huge eyes. And I'm not suggesting that pale-skinned aliens with huge eyes don't exist. I'm really putting forward something that actually can't be refuted because of the way the human brain works and the way that the dream space works, the way our subconscious mind works when it is in a sedated, altered, tasered, stunned, or traumatized state. That's just a medical fact. It's a psychiatric fact, a psychological fact, and is anybody in the profession would agree that that is the case. But what's actually happened is abductees have told their stories and have unfortunately skipped that bit in perhaps being traumatized and not realizing that in a subconscious altered state, or even in a conscious altered state, our perception of what's happening to us is also altered. It is exaggerated. It is changed. It is morphed. It is magnified. It is almost like a crystalline hologram manifestation of what it is that's actually happening. And so as I was looking at these conversations and watching these videos, this did occur to me that it is possible that it's actually been the government all along that have been taking people from their homes, including children, conducting necessary genetic tests on them first, putting them into experiment programs for their own militaristic means, and putting them into breeding programs so that the Department of Defense, specifically in America, has a constant supply of recruits. They cannot always rely on volunteers into the army, into top-level projects, into top-secret projects, all the way up to majestic. And yet they seem to have a constant supply of employees. And many of them are often described as, these men in black, and they turn up and they've got white heads and skin and they don't look human and they look like aliens and all this sort of stuff. There's also the Space Force and the odd assassin here or there that they may need to produce through their breeding programs. Military personnel need to man every vehicle that they produce, and whatever Space Force program is in place, they also need well and truly indoctrinated and 100% trustworthy and loyal workers. So the breeding program is producing children that are then raised by the government in underground facilities or otherwise. In doing so, they would not grow up with much pigmentation in their skin. They would be predominantly very, very pale-skinned, probably even hairless. And in having been raised underground and no exposure to sunlight, perhaps, they may have developed a different sort of eyes, different sort of eye shape to take in more light. Who knows? But they would be trained, educated, and programmed within the United States military, completely out of the mainstream. No chance of them getting dumbed down by television or any of these things. They would be completely off-grid, no papers, and raised to be cyber soldiers, military recruits, and super high IQ workers and personnel for space projects, flying craft, unmanned aerial phenomenons, drones, all sorts of things that they would be required to serve the United States of America in this capacity. What I am yet to see after all these years is an Australian abduction story or an abduction story from other parts of the world. I'm not saying they haven't happened. I haven't come across that data. It is mainly all coming out of the United States of America. This UFO sightings happen all over the world, but the abduction stories are coming from the United States of America predominantly. This is not to say that it's not occurring in other countries. Millions of children go missing every year without a trace. And millions of adults go missing every year without a trace. Some of you might put your hand up at this point and say, yeah, they're being put into child sex trafficking rings. I'm sure that many of them are. But I think that there's another side to this, where that may not be the case for all of them, and that the breeding programs that take place are simply because they need to ensure that they are being genetically crossbred properly. What I mean by crossbred is that when you raise a human underground and keep it completely out of the mainstream and indoctrinate it a certain way and educate it a certain way, and it grows up in this particular environment to serve a particular function, it's really no longer human in the way that we understand ourselves as humans and the way that we are, the way that our culture shapes everything about us, the way our media shapes everything about us. If you raise a child that's not subjected to any of those things, and you do it underground in facilities, well, you might come across that individual at some point and wonder if indeed it is even human. So That's one angle that I can think of that would explain it. And I do not mean any offense to any UFO abductee that has been traumatized by the experience. I am merely offering a more tangible and less frustrating perspective that is very difficult to refute, to narrow down what this connection is between the government and a UFO cover-up. Now, if this is the case, it then makes perfect sense as to why so-called men in black would turn up, or certain silencing tactics would be employed on anybody who says they witness a UFO or they have been abducted. The government turn up the next day or whenever and say you didn't see anything. That's going to be your story. Now, why would they do that if it wasn't them in the first place? Because here's the fact of it, and I'm sure the CIA would be aware of the basic psychology behind this. You don't need to, the government doesn't need to hide what supposed aliens are doing, because it's easy to discredit. They don't actually need to turn up and start threatening people when their alleged story is so easy to discredit and slander and call it a weather balloon and call, it's very easy. They have the power of the media behind them. One of Whitley Strieber's books got moved from non-fiction to fiction by some people just because they didn't seem to think that it was true, and that's one good way of taking someone's popularity and their potential to convince others of the same and discrediting them. It's that easy. You don't need to send goons over and start telling people you didn't see anything that did not happen to you. You're delusional, and that's the last we want to talk about it. They don't do that unless they're protecting themselves, right? There was another story that I heard. A woman whose name I can't remember and probably wouldn't mention anyway, to keep the focus on the discussion that we're having here, this one-way discussion, and less on personalities. But she was saying that a friend of hers was on the phone with her. They both had normal phones, non-cellular phones. And her friend was saying that she had an experience where she was taken into an underground facility by sort of humanoid-looking beings, and they told her that they were from Cassiopeia. And her friend said to her, well, they tell us all number of things about where they might be from, everything from Mars to Cassiopeia to the Pleiades. They're always saying they're from here, there, or somewhere else. So without any way of confirming it, it's really sort of irrelevant information. And then apparently at this point in the conversation, a man interrupted their phone call saying, yes, they are there and we know where they're from. And then he hung up. So not only was their phone call being listened in to by the government, but the government was then inserting disinformation into the conversation to keep the women believing that it's aliens and not the government. Firstly, why would a government agent listen into the phone call and confirm what the ladies are saying if they didn't want anyone to know about it, unless they're disinfoing to let the ladies believe what they want to and to shift the focus from themselves, which is psychologically the more rational explanation for this type of behaviour from government institutions. All of that being said, I do believe that with us being in a simulation, in a physical simulation, the illusion of a physical simulation, that beyond the veil, there may well be a world where we are no longer limited by our laws of physics. And there may well be beings, consciousness that reside beyond that veil. But I do not perceive those beings, if they are there, as malevolent. I believe that the malevolence that we experience here on Earth in our physical simulation is a product of man. I believe our simulation is military simulation. I explain it in my book, and I explain the technology in my book, Simulation, the transcripts. But I do think that if it were the case that there is something occurring and people are being taken by beings and they are being mistreated, that it is highly likely to be linked to government activity. I do not believe in a malevolent, advanced being residing outside of this simulation, because I believe that this simulation is where the hostility is, and outside of it, there is not. I believe that it was it came into existence from negative energy. So I'm not trying to debunk any other type of experience that anybody has ever had where they believe they've seen an angel, spoken with God, channel, believe in reincarnation, or any other beautiful, loving, saintly, peaceful, heavenly kind of thing that anybody has ever experienced. I am not debunking those things. I am not suggesting anything about the many beautiful experiences that people have within their own consciousness, and more explicitly and directly with other intelligent consciousnesses, entities that may or may not reside outside of this simulation. I am suggesting that when people are being ripped from their beds, children included, millions of them go missing a year, and the government's response to this is to silence it, to cover it up, and to let people believe a story about it, that it is more likely the government that is doing it to begin with, for the reasons that I mentioned. Some of you might think, yeah, but aliens could be doing that to us as well. They put us into breeding programs because they want this, that, and the other. I don't buy it yet, because I don't see what's so fantastic about us as less evolved creatures that aliens would want to breed with us for. We're a downgrade, unless they are having trouble in that area themselves and they need us for that reason, okay. But it begs the question, why is the government trying so hard to cover it up? Because people would panic? I don't know. I mean, it's easy to discredit. It's just easy to discredit. It's not happening every day. It's happening sometimes to a few people here and there over a number of decades that we know of. The rest we never hear from again. They're missing, gone for good. So how this works into the simulation, if you turn on the internet, please don't do it by Wi-Fi. But if you plug in at the moment and you have a look at every movie that's streaming online, every space movie that's streaming online, Star Wars, God, even all the movies that have been made about abductions, all of that is constantly in the airwaves. It's constantly in the airwaves that we are in. We are in them. We are swimming in the same substance as the airwaves, the vibrations and the frequencies that are being used to send information through towers, phones, TVs, cable satellite radio, police radio, taxi radio, air traffic control, all videos, public videos, private videos, professional videos, movies, film, art, images, music. It's all there, and it's all identifiable by its own set of numbers. Each item of data has its own set of numbers. And if you go back to what I said earlier about the Enfield haunting, all that needs to happen is for the numbers to align, for the data to align. You get a merger of data, which is aligned with a specific location, geographic coordinates, and the rest of the data at that location. The address, the people, the birth dates, the birth certificates, the phone numbers, the social media accounts. Absolutely massive, incredibly complicated, also very simple. So when it comes to UFO abductions or UFO experiences or strange dreams or paranormal events and things that we don't understand, anything that happens to you, please, I want you to first disconnect the television aerial from your roof. Disconnect any radios that you have in the house. Disconnect the Wi-Fi that you may have through your home modem for your internet. And do not turn your smartphone on for a week at least. And let me know if it happens again. If it doesn't happen again, turn all those things back on and see if it happens again. Test it for yourselves. Because the sad fact of it, after decades of humble, intelligent, learned, respectable people, educated individuals studying these mysteries with all their hearts, with all their minds, and with all their soul, is that it is actually quite awkward for me to put this forward in such a way that may make them look like fools, and that is not my intention. Where there is technology in the environment, it must be eliminated before any other explanation can be looked at. And where people are being abducted from their homes, and it is just as likely the government for military reasons and breeding programs, that has to be explored first and completely ruled out beyond a shadow of a doubt before any other explanation can be entertained. And I'm a believer, not a cynic. I'm not trying to pop anyone's bubble. I consider myself a spiritual person. I find life very difficult and very tedious every day. I've had my share of pain, trauma, psychological torture as a result of being a spiritual person. I've been targeted and attacked. I've had my life destroyed over and over again. And at no point, sadly, does anybody around me take me seriously when I ask them to turn the technology off. And that perhaps if they did, they wouldn't feel the need to treat me in such a way. This is just the way that it is. On the abduction thing, you might be wondering why they select certain people. Well, they already have a profile on them. Everyone's got papers. And they'd be looking for the right genes. So that's why it's some and not others. But the physical abduction that they experience is happening within a simulation. So at some point, when we get back to the very first podcasts that I released here, what is the simulation? And we talked about the glands in the brain. And we talked about how social media lines up with the glands in the brain and manipulates them and inserts and implants images into our visual fields, overwriting our reality. And we look at time in a new way, and that everything is happening sort of on a vertical plane, not horizontal. It's all happening now. It could be said that even before the era of television or radio, if there was anybody feeling abducted by extraterrestrial beings, or seeing a burning bush, or seeing a bright light in the sky, or Ezekiel's wheel, that these may well have, in fact, within the simulation, been NASA, pictures on the internet, or anything else bleeding through from one data entry point to another, which is really what time boils down to. Different points of data entry. So when there's a lot of movies online and there's a lot of data online, people will be dreaming all kinds of things and also having all kinds of experiences. And ironically, the government is part of the simulation. At higher levels, they are the cause of it, but they are also part of it. And it is bizarre to me that they operate in such a way as that they seem completely unaware of this fact. So when it comes to abductions, UFO abductions, or abductions by humanoid beings, and there's the presence of a bright light, or bright flashing lights, could just as easily be a squad car, but seen through the filter and lens of the subconscious, which automatically magnifies everything. But they are part of the simulation, and so when there's a physical abduction, we have a situation where an event has been triggered through the system. It therefore triggers government personnel, and in other cases, it triggers an individual to have an experience that they may or may not have had. We are incredibly complex beings. We have only just begun to understand how our minds work, how our brain waves and the substance of the brain itself and the energy field of the brain is capable of picking up all kinds of information. And we've only just begun, and they're already wanting to promote an artificial type of intelligence as being superior, which it clearly is not, never will be. If it were, I would have expected that everything I have said to you would have already been said by artificial intelligence. If it has been in exactly the same way that I have said it and in exactly the same format as my files, somebody, if you ever find that, please let me know. Then I'll know where it came from, and we will have further proof. But it is not a superior creation. It is actually a malevolent creation. It does not reside in the ether of life. It is purely mechanical. And I believe that the malevolence and the hostility and the harm that comes to human beings on this planet is because that is the simulation that we're in. It is how it is wired. It is wired for our suffering and our pain. It is why there is the strong religious belief that life is suffering, and only at death are we freed and released from the hell that they put us through. I don't mean to drag anyone's day down or your night down. There's plenty of good times here as well. But I think there's a general consensus worldwide that we have to make the most of our health and every moment we have to save our own souls from what it is that this ridiculous system is doing, and where the government has covered things up from the public, most likely so that nobody points the finger at them. it is important for us to be aware of it before ever trusting them with anything. Some people might say, yeah, well, without them we wouldn't have this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, we don't really know what life's like without them, so let's not go there. We might be able to do it better. Anyway, look, thank you for listening. And I just want to really reiterate that point that I am not trying to debunk anybody's experience, least of all Whitley Strieber's or anybody else that has had an abduction experience. I understand fully how traumatic it is. Something sort of similar happened to me, which is why I started these files. And I understand the depth and the pain and the longevity of trauma and how difficult it is to get through. I am merely suggesting that the problem may be a little closer to home, and that the diversion tactics that have been employed by the United States military, Department of Defense, government, intelligence agencies, that it's aliens and, all of this sort of stuff. It may or may well not be, but in most respects, they are covering their own asses. They're definitely involved. They send people over to silence you and discredit where they can to cover their own asses. They'll call it for national security, so that the enemy doesn't know what they're doing. What a load of bullshit. It's one individual versus the whole world. The hyperreact that they have shown over the years in deliberately visiting individuals and threatening them and silencing them and taking their work is a massive hyperreact for people who apparently have done nothing wrong and aren't involved. There's no need to silence an individual, because if they're an individual, they don't really have anywhere near the power of the United States of America to tell the world whatever they want and to feed to the media whatever story they want. So if that's still happening to anyone out there, I'm very sorry, but you can probably just tell them to stop hyperreacting and get their shit together and maybe do a cleaner job next time, so that it doesn't look so obviously to be the case that they are the ones behind it. Thank you very much for listening. Again, any questions, please let me know. Subscribe, share, like. I look forward to having you here with me, all 200 and something of you. It's a relatively young channel. I spent the first few years just putting the research up, but in getting into the podcast, I'm hoping to make it more of a community. So if you can share this with others and invite them to join, that would be very much appreciated. And Godspeed, and I will be back soon to talk more with you about incredible things and things we need to be aware of when it comes to the simulation that we are part of. Thank you.